We need a Hail Mary pass. We need raw power. We need monsters.
Monsters are a key convention within various genres of fiction media, such as horror, science fiction, and fantasy. There are various groupings of monsters we see in fiction media, and each of them have developed over many decades. They each have very distinct characteristics that drive them apart, but still they are discussed under the umbrella term of monster. Therefore, monsters can be portrayed in many ways and for various audience reactions. Looking at some various types of monsters on screen, we can see how they have progressed over time and what the main connecting elements between each classification of monster are. Within cinema, monster movies of the 1930s saw the rising popularity of horror and established some of the key iconography we associate with monsters. Films such as The Mummy, The Invisible Man, and Werewolf of London are some examples of these classic horror films featuring monsters, with the films arguing that unknown elements of science are dangerous to explore. For example, James Whale's Frankenstein raises the question of whether the scientist that made the creature is truly the monster. The film's title comes from said scientist, Henry Frankenstein, and we see his guilt as he watches his creation terrify and murder his neighbours. On the other hand, the creature is still portrayed as the centre problem of the film. He has sympathetic elements, but he largely attacks those he sees around him, and lacks communication skills to understand his true motives. Despite their terrifying demeanours, there is still an element of sympathy within these classic monsters. Setting themselves apart from this crowd, vampires are largely portrayed with a more human side than other forms of monsters. They present as mostly human, with their only main difference being sharp fangs and a thirst for blood. These animalistic traits are the main reasons for vampires being outcasted by society. It makes the characters and audience feel uncomfortable to witness human figures acting like animals. However, there are still overtly animalistic portrayals of vampires. One example of this is found in From Dusk Till Dawn, where the main characters realise the bar they are visiting is inhabited by vampires. Once their identity is revealed, the vampires immediately turn aggressive and begin attacking everyone who is not one of them. However, these monsters can also be portrayed as the tall, attractive, and intimidating figures of a young vampire. The inspiration for this portrayal was passed down from Dracula and his various depictions over the years. A trend of exploring the attractive elements of vampires grew from this. As Gelder points out, every vampire film is to some degree a self-conscious remake or sequel or restaging of other vampire films that have preceded it. More ferocious, unthinking vampire films are inspired from Nosferatu, whereas the newer age vampires are revised versions of the Dracula persona. This leads us to the 2000s, where vampires on screen were targeted towards a teenage demographic. Examples of this type of representation are Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the Twilight series, and the Vampire Diaries. These vampire stories played more into teenage fantasies of romance and melodrama. However, the vampires still embodied their animalistic and loner tendencies. So much like their earlier forms and other classifications of monsters, they find themselves outcasted by society. Opposingly, beings classed as artificial intelligence are particularly fascinating to study as monsters. There are various types of AI in fiction media, robots, androids, and cyborgs being the key three. Robots are represented as machines who are typically aids to humans. Androids are usually more human-like, perhaps not in appearance but certainly in thought patterns, and are relatively independent. Finally, cyborgs are closest to appearing human and are often portrayed as free thinkers. Humans can be fearful and unsure of AI, therefore they are frequently portrayed as monsters in screen texts. The more human a robot becomes, the more fearful humans tend to become as a consequence. There is a sense of denial from the human characters towards any robots claiming they are human. One example is found in Blade Runner. Buchanan notes that this film was created around a time where people were questioning various aspects of human identity. Throughout the film, protagonist Deckard is searching for replicants, androids presenting as humans, to terminate them. The androids have become highly skilled at blending in with mankind, making Deckard himself question what makes up humanity. Meanwhile, another replicant in a conversation states,
"No computers, Sebastian. We're physical,"
expressing a desire to be seen as people. Humans on screen find themselves questioning whether they should accept androids into society, making the ostracization of monsters a connecting similarity. Monsters on screen come in various shapes and sizes. They are composed of many differing elements that classifies them into certain groupings of monsters. However, looking at some of these groupings, we can see what commonalities remain between all monsters. Animalistic or unnatural tendencies cause fear in human characters, leading monsters to become rejected by society in some capacity. Whether they be human-created monstrosities, vampires, lifelike AI, this is the through line that connects them all.